Okay, so in this question, we are asked, which of the following combinations can be used to make a buffer? Well, it's important to remember how we get a buffer. Remember that in order to make a buffer, what you need is a mixture of a weak acid plus its conjugate base, or you need a mixture of a weak base plus its conjugate acid. All right? Now, normally the way you would achieve that is that you would mix together from two different sources some weak acid and its conjugate base or weak base and its conjugate acid. But an important thing to remember for this particular question is that we can arrive at a buffer by doing a titration of a weak acid to the halfway point. So, or we can titrate a weak acid to the halfway point. Okay? All right, and that's what we need to do in this case, because if you look over on these choices, none of these are a mixture of a weak acid and its conjugate base. The conjugate base in this case would be Cn-. That would be the conjugate base. So in none of these choices are we mixing together this weak acid with its conjugate base. So that means that we need to exploit this other method where we start with a weak acid, but then we titrate it to the halfway point. Okay? So if you look over here, think about what we're doing. We have this weak acid, and then we're going to add some sodium hydroxide, which is going to be a source of the hydroxide ion. And because that's a strong base, this is going to be a one-directional complete reaction where this hydroxide is going to snag that hydrogen off the acid, and we're going to produce the conjugate base, and then we're going to get a water molecule. Okay? That's the reaction that's going to occur if we mix together some of this weak acid with some strong base. But the thing is, we don't want to go all the way. So if I mix together this 0.3 molar weak acid with 0.3 molar strong base, then all of this is going to convert into its conjugate base, and therefore I won't have a mixture. In order to have a buffer, I need to have a mixture of the weak acid and its conjugate base. So I've already eliminated that possibility because this is not the conjugate base, or it's not going to get me to the conjugate base. Same thing there. And right here I decided, well, if I mix these two solutions together, instead of getting to the halfway point where I have a mixture of the weak acid and its conjugate base, I'm going to convert all of this weak acid into its conjugate base. So that's not going to give me a buffer either. So by process of elimination, it looks like D is the answer. But it also makes sense because this concentration is lower than the concentration of my weak acid. So that's going to titrate about half of my weak acid into the conjugate base. So I will end up having this combination, this mixture of a weak acid and its conjugate base. So D is what we're going to do to create a buffer.